This is Steel Rose's podcast. This podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. I am thrilled to introduce all of you to Marysol James. She is a romance writer with 30 books published to date, spread over 6 best-selling series. She landed in this career utterly by happy accident, and by doing so, learned the value of deviating from a set path and embracing opportunities outside of the box. She has blazed her own path and success, emerging from an abusive relationship, finding her dignity and strength. Marysol, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jenny. It's good to see you again.
So, Marysol, why don't you let the listeners get to know you a little bit, share part of your story. I think they'll probably be very interested in where you started and how you ended up in romance writing. And then the parts of your story that where you found yourself again after getting a little bit lost.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll just jump right into how I got into romance writing. But that requires going back a little bit about why it's such a surprise that I ended up in romance writing. By the way, that is a cute mug. I love that. Mama Bear?
Thank you. Yeah.
I got to get me one of those. Okay, anyway, I was raised in a small town in Canada, and it was always just assumed that I would go into academia or law. Law school, I might be university professor. I ended up getting my master's degree in international law and business. So I started out my professional life very much in upper management and working overseas. I had management positions in China and then in Hong Kong and then eventually in Poland, where I ended up getting married and having 2 small children. And I was kind of at the top of my game when I lived in Warsaw. I was the chief operational director of Central and Eastern Europe for a publishing company based in France. And I was diagnosed with cancer for the second time in my life. The first time was when I was a child. And this time around, I was a married woman with 2 children and an incredibly high pressure management position from which I was immediately fired upon my diagnosis. So suddenly there I was, extremely ill, flat on my back from chemotherapy more times than I was not. And I had literally nothing to do. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to be. I felt like I had kind of lost everything I'd ever worked towards professionally in one fell swoop. But that wasn't really my priority at that time. My priority was my family and my health. So it just so happened that around the same time that I was fired, there was a thing called NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. And they had opened up sort of a summer camp to writing. And I was placed in this virtual cabin with 2 other women named Angie and Ruby. And the 3 of us really bonded just really well. So I was using the time off from work that I had to write a book that I had been working on for a while. Not romance, contemporary literature, quite heavy, quite dark. And I finished it because, I was going to work. I had nowhere else to be. And I said to them, listen, I still have 2 weeks of this virtual summer camp. I need something else to do to finish out the camp. And they said, well, why don't you write the exact opposite of anything you've ever written in your life? Being academic, writing a master's thesis about the International Red Cross, writing, budget reports, and then writing this heavy sort of dark novel. Why don't you try writing a romance? And I said, that's utterly ridiculous. I've never even read a romance. I wouldn't know where to begin. So they said, that's the point. Like, that's exactly the point. Okay. Just think of it like your mental health break. So I said, okay. And between the 3 of us, we came up with this sexy cowboy romance plot, and I laughed the whole way through it. I laughed for 2 weeks and I wrote it in 2 weeks. I finished it. And then I said to them, okay, well, that's done. And Angie and Ruby said, "Nuh-uh, you have to publish it." And I said, why would I publish this thing that was just, it was almost a joke. And they said, no, publish it, publish it. So I did. I published it, self-published it on Amazon, and kind of forgot about it for a couple of months. And then one month I noticed there was money coming into my bank account, like royalties. So I went to my Amazon profile, my author's profile, and like this thing was a best-selling beach read that summer. And to this minute, Jenny, I don't know who found it first. I don't know how it was found. I don't know how these people told other people about it. But I sold tens of thousands of these things. This one book that I wrote in 2 weeks while
You didn't
having
do any
cancer.
promotion for it? You did
I
no
did
promotion
nothing.
for it. You just...
I told nobody. Nothing. And I thought, oh my God. So I told Angie and Ruby, I said, guys, you're not going to believe. And they said, well, okay, no, you have to get on, like, start a Facebook page. I said, why would I start it? She said, because people will be looking for you. You have to, So I said, fine. So I started a Facebook page. And one of the first things when people found me there, they asked me was, when's the next book coming out? And I thought, there is no next book. There was barely a first book. Don't you people understand? This thing was just something I did to pass the time while I was flat on my back from chemo, right? But I said, okay, well, whatever. I'm still flat on my back, and you can write in bed. Just put your laptop on a pillow. So I wrote book 2, and this time I actually did promote it. I said, like, on Facebook, I put the link. I said, available now. Became a bestseller. And then it was the exact same thing again. Is there a book 3? And I'm thinking, oh my God, But I did write a third book, and then I got a bit tired of the sexy cowboys on the ranch, so I started a new series about MMA fighters and these guys who own a karate training MMA gym. I wrote a couple of those. They became bestsellers, and by this point, I'd kind of written 5 books in about 7 months, and by this point,
Wow.
I was well again. So I said to my husband, I said, well, I need to go find a new management job, because this is all I had been doing was management. And I started looking, and then, I went for a couple of interviews, and then I kept looking at my royalties. Like, I kept looking at the sales. And one day I sort of said to myself, why am I killing myself to try to get into a field that I don't have a great feeling about right now, in terms of how I was so betrayed by the fact that I was just let go like that. And I felt really vulnerable about it. And I thought to myself, why am I killing myself trying to get back into a field that I'm not that confident about anymore? And I'm doing really well. I have these fans. I have people who buy my books. I have a sort of library that's being sort of built up slowly. I can work from home. I do what I want. I answer to myself. If my kids need me, if they're sick, I'm here. I don't have to beg a boss for time off or anything. And I thought, why am I looking for a full-time job? I think I have a full-time job. So when I say I fell into it by accident, I mean that literally. It just came out of nowhere. But it's what I've done for the past few years. And actually, I just published my 31st book 3 weeks ago. So now it's 31 books. Yes.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. So that's what I do now. I'm a romance writer, and I never play. And honestly, if it hadn't been for Angie and Ruby, like, all the credit has to go to them, because if they hadn't said, "Why don't you just do it? Like, what's it going to hurt? What's the worst that can happen? You write a crappy romance book nobody reads." And I thought, okay, fair enough, right? Fair enough. And that's how it happened, exactly like that.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. I love that part of your story so much because it's the perfect definition of you were experiencing these, I don't want to call it burdens, but you were having these like really intense experiences in your life. When you look back at like the trajectory of like how things happened, can you pinpoint moments where you're like, oh, that was an aha moment? That was like, oh, go this direction. You know, like there must have been little moments that kind of pushed you. Like, how did you end up in your the summer camp writing program? Like there must have been like little moments where you deviated, because that's where like I think people get hung up in this particular thing, because everyone's waiting for this big sign that's like, do this. And and that's not how it works exactly. Like sometimes it's like a very small thing that happens in January that affects a decision you make in like March. So was it something similar for you?
Well, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because the truth is I always wanted to be a writer. Ever since I was very small, I really wanted to write. And I was encouraged to be a writer, but I was encouraged to write in certain ways. And my teachers encouraged me to write, but the whole idea, I mean, especially back then, because I'm 52. So back then, when I was, 10 years old, in order to make a living as a writer, you really had to have an agent. You had to be signed on to one of the big publishing houses. You needed to really just have all of that on your side. And self-publishing with Amazon. And I know there are a million reasons to have a problem with Amazon, but I can say as a self-published writer, they changed the game for people like me, where I didn't need to go out and have a team whose approval or validation or support I had won over. I could just do it. Anybody can self-publish on Amazon. Anybody. So sort of getting back to your original question, I always felt a pull to being a writer, but it just wasn't something that was as possible then as it is now. So instead, I wrote a lot at university. I made my thesis about 4 times longer than it had to be, just for the experience of researching and writing,
I still have my thesis. I did the same thing.
I love my thesis. Every once in a while, I'll read it. I'll maybe read it once a year and I'll think, damn, this was really well written,
Yeah.
And it was something that I always expressed myself better in writing. I'm not great expressing myself verbally still, but if I'm in a relationship with somebody or I'm trying to say something important, I always have to write it. I would prefer to send it and then talk about it after, as opposed to trying to broach the topic verbally first, because it doesn't tend to go very right. So I just had all these little tugs on my sleeves. And then it was interesting because I got into writing. I became sort of a freelance journalist. I was teaching English, but I was also looking for a bit of extra money, maybe meet some new people. So I sent a short article into this magazine in Warsaw for expats. It was an English language magazine, one of the first in the city. And I just submitted an article. They were looking for new writers, and I was immediately accepted. So then I was actually being paid to write for the first time in my life. And then when the editor-in-chief left, they immediately came to me and said, will you take over as editor-in-chief, because you're such a strong writer, but you also have a bigger picture mentality. So then I got into management and publishing. And then I left that and I got the chief operational director job in Warsaw, but for a French company, but it was a publishing house. But by then
Mm-hmm.
I was more like managing teams of people. I wasn't so much writing. I was working in publishing, but I was the person, responsible for the team, responsible for the sales, responsible for the budget, responsible for the advertising, the promotion, whatever. I was the face of the thing. And there was very, very little writing. But it, especially working as the editor in chief of that magazine for 4 years, I got such an education in publishing something beginning to end. Because if you're just the writer, you submit, you're done. But when you're the editor in chief, you're responsible for every moving piece. And being a self published writer now, I'm responsible for every moving piece, everything from what's written to how it's edited to the cover concept to the entire series concept. It has to have a thread that makes sense, to the promotion, to the sales, to
Yeah.
showing up at events, to doing things like this. I mean, it's all down to me. And I can honestly say that taking that job as editor in chief gave me this amazing overview of not just the writing, but everything around it. And it has served me so well. And at the time, I never would have thought, in 15 years' time, you're going to need all of this stuff to take care of your own books, beginning to end. But it's just one more thing that felt so right. It felt so right to be in publishing. It felt better than anything else. Um, and I feel like when I deviated off the path into that publishing house, but just running the show for them at a management level, I never really felt right in it. And as soon as I was
Mm-hmm.
booted out of it forcefully and I returned to writing, this time full time, it feels right. It's the most right feeling I've had since I was editor in chief of the magazine. So what I've discovered is it's not just the writing for me, it's everything around it. It's the whole concept of a book that feels really right to me. And it's something that if I look back, I can see the moments where I got my experience and my knowledge. I just didn't know what I was getting it for at the time.
I have it's interesting because I had always been a creative writer. And I think we
Mm,
talked about this when we last chatted.
we did,
When I
yeah.
was young, like starting, like I was in like maybe like fourth grade, fifth grade, I started doing creative writing. And I used to get these bursts of just like ideas. And I would be, back then in
Mm.
the 90s, it was my little hand scribbling on my
Yeah.
in my notebooks, like trying to get the idea out before I lost the sensation. And I remember the one time I was like scribbling like furiously at the dinner table, and my older brother came over and he was like bothering me. He was trying to get my attention. And I don't remember if it was my mom or my dad, but one of my parents interrupted him. They were like, she's having a creative, like, leave her be. She's inspired right now. Leave her
Wow.
alone. Like, let her do her thing. And all the way from like fifth grade all through into high school, I loved it. I used
Yeah.
to do like the high school published works, and I would go to Barnes and Noble to read like my poems. And I also used it at the
Oh.
time. My parents were going through a divorce, and they were separating, and it was devastating for me. So that became my outlet. And that's
Mm.
similar to what you said. Like, that was how I was able to put my feelings like someplace, because I didn't know where else to put them. So
Hmm.
it came out in a lot of my writings, and my parents, because they're my parents, still have packets of like poems
Gosh.
and stories and like all this stuff that I wrote. The unfortunate thing that happened in my journey, because I had wanted to be a creative writer for forever, and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is where my passion is. Um,
Mm.
with my parents' divorce also came, a trauma response for me,
Mm.
where I was like, I'm seeing what they're going through. And while I love this, I don't think it's going to make me money. Because again, like, this is the, late 90s at this point, early 2000s. Self-publishing was not a thing. And to me, to myself, I was like, I need to make sure that I'm never in that situation that my mom's in. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So she had
So when there
nothing
was the
really.
separation, she
Yeah.
came out financially worse off?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because they were
That is a
separated for
huge, that's a
and
huge
I
lesson. Yeah. For a young woman.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I observed this, and I was very close to her during that time because I felt a responsibility to take care of her because she was like
Mm-hmm.
falling to pieces.
Yeah.
And for me, like as you said, like this, I saw this, and I was like, I think I was about 14 when they separated, and I immediately was like, I need to make sure that I'm making money because, you know, if this were to ever happen this can't happen to me. Like I need to make sure that I'm self-sustainable. And so
And
I
protected.
completely dropped.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
protected.
absolutely,
Yeah.
completely dropped my whole, idea, all these beautiful ideas I had, totally dropped them and said, I'm going to go corporate. I need to make money. And
Mm-hmm.
similar to like what you said, when I went into after college, when I started working, I started in event planning and I found my way eventually into marketing and communications for pharmaceutical companies. And that's where I've stayed for 18 years because there was this part of me that could be creative at work. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was a part of me that still felt like I can still use some of my creativity here. And only until the past like 3 or 4 years did I feel like that, that was fulfilling that need. Cause now I have that itch that's like, I need to do something else. And that's how the podcast came to be. But it's very interesting to hear um, how your story kind of unfolded because I think a lot of women have these pivotal moments. And when you really think back, like, where was your passion before? Like, yeah, you're doing what you should be doing, what you feel like you have to do right now. But your passion is really what would light you up. That's what's really gonna, that energy and that feeling, like where you were just saying, you were like, this is the most right you've ever felt. That feeling is you being in alignment with your purpose. And that sensation is saying to you, like, this is your path. You're going to generate the most income with this path because it excites you so much and it puts you in such a good space.
Well, it's interesting what you said about when you were going through your parents' separation and divorce, how you were writing a lot. It became your outlet. I mentioned that I had cancer once before as a child. I was 9 when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I actually ended up living in the hospital for 3 years. It took them that long to kind of sort me
Wow.
out, and that I was at that time. I was still going to school because you have to attend school. You can't just drop out of school for 3 years. So you go when you're able. And my teacher was I was such a big reader, even as a child. I've always been a reader. And she also encouraged me to write. And so when I was able to write during that 3-year period, I wrote a whole short novel about a girl living in the hospital. And of course, it was like
Mm-hmm.
fiction, but it wasn't fiction. And it
Yeah.
wasn't written in the first person, it was written in the third person, but it was definitely me. And of course, my doctor was very recognizable and the nurses were very recognizable, but it was never meant for anybody to read except me and my teacher. It became kind of our project.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it is because after my parents separated and divorced, there were a lot of house moves and now my father
Yeah.
has passed away and my mother is very unwell. So I don't know where it is, but a part of me, I wish I could see what my sort of 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old self was making of that time in my life. But again, it's just one more example of I should have been writing all this time. This is what I should have been doing. And the whole management thing was partly out of keeping my parents happy because they really wanted me to be a lawyer or something, because they wanted me to be safe. They weren't motivated like let's crush her spirit, let's make her into a corporate drone. It wasn't that. It was legitimate worry of how is our daughter, who is bright and optimistic and a little bit naive, how is she going to survive in the world if she doesn't have a steady paycheck? And they were really worried about that. And I can look back and be resentful of the fact that they didn't support me, or I can look back and say, I'm a 52-year-old woman. I have 2 teenage boys. If they came to me and said, I want to be a full-time vlogger and this is where I'm going to get my money, I'd be like, why don't we, bank a little bit on, why don't we go find a job? You know what I mean? And I
Right.
can see where the motivation comes from, which is everybody needs to earn a paycheck. You just do.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I've kind of taken this sort of, I'm, meandering, sort of not very direct path back into writing, the fact that I make money from it is an incredible surprise and bonus because I just wasn't raised to think you could. But like I said, being self-published, especially as a romance writer, changes the whole game. So that's where I can honestly say thank you to Amazon for setting up this self-publisher platform, because without it, I don't
I
think
didn't
I
even
could be
know
a
that that was
writer.
there. Yeah, I honestly, as soon as you
After
said it,
this, you and I will talk, and
yeah,
I'll set you up on it,
yeah.
and we'll get you. Because if you'd like to get writing again, I'll be your biggest fan. I'll buy whatever you publish.
I have to tell you, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't know what and it's happens a lot with the podcast because this is, and I've said this to other guests. I'm like,
Mhm.
I'll be in like kind of like, it because you're an entrepreneur. You get the imposter syndrome. A lot of the guests that come on, we talk about it like in the offline conversations where, when you're rolling on something by yourself, it's very easy to get that imposter syndrome feeling where you're like, what am I even doing here? I love the podcast. Like everyone who comes on knows it. Like I love doing this. I love interviewing all of you because I want to share your stories. This is so important to me. But I always get those feelings of like, is this what I'm supposed to do? Like, am I even doing this right?
Mhm.
Is anyone listening? Is it important? Is it significant? And
Mhm.
over the past couple of weeks, I've also been thinking to myself, because I had some other conversations with guests where I was like, I wanted to tap into something else. And I was trying to find exactly what it might be. And you're like, for the fall series, I think you're like the 6th or 7th author to come on and tell me that they self-published. And I'm like, Marysol, as soon as you started talking, I was like, and you said Amazon, I paused and I'm like, Amazon? And I like kind of wrote it down. I'm like, because I've been waiting for this little light bulb. I often
Yeah.
wait for these little light bulb moments, and this felt like it just now. I was going to ask you anyway
Mhm.
after we recorded about it because it is something that I've always thought about. And my husband even said to me, he says to me all the time, he's like, you should write a book. You're interviewing all these authors. Like, why don't you find something? And I literally, like, an idea just popped into my head. And I was like, I'm going to
Mhm.
have to ask Marysol when we hop off, like, what's the process? Because I think that it's there. And that's the other thing I want to highlight from your story, outside of me being excited about this, because I had this like aha moment just now, which
Yeah.
listeners, just so you know, like I go with aha moments, like your instinct and your intuition, when you have those like little sparks in your head, lean into it because that's usually like something big that you have to really try out. So side note to all
Mhm.
the listeners, if you have a spark, go with it.
Mhm.
Marysol, what I was going to say to you is, your story leading up to you self-publishing the romance novel, which was like totally outside of what anything you would have done. You had while your parents did push you maybe in a direction you didn't necessarily want, all of those steps actually prepared you more, I think, for what you're doing right now, because now you're on your own, self-published, you have the wealth of knowledge as an executive. That's a big deal. Like pulling from that executive background to help you move along, because even for the podcast, I have marketing experience and I have broadcast experience in my professional life. And while it's not an industry that I, necessarily want to really be in anymore, I got this great project management experience. I've got this great client services experience. I've cultivated a lot of other talents pulled from jobs that are not creative. And it's actually helped me to develop, like I launched had a podcast guide earlier this year. And that was really pulled together based off of all of my broadcast management experience, all of my, and all of my project management experience. And I packaged it up for like podcasters. Cause I'm like, this is a big deal. Like I can really help other people get through this. So it's interesting, like to be able to really look at like, well, where have I come from and what can I do with what I already have? And then you'll also see, like you said, like there's through lines that you can probably pinpoint to say like, oh, well, I've always really I liked writing. You already knew you liked writing. You were really great at it for corporate. And then you kind of just like kept pulling that string, and like you got to unravel this like great new thing for you to do, which is like truly amazing. I can't believe you put it on Amazon and then you forgot about it kind of and just let it there.
I did. Well, because I had self-published a collection of short stories, and I had self-published a book, the first book in this series about this Canadian town, and it's very dark and heavy and dramatic. So this book, the one that I told you about, it was the second one in the series. And there's supposed to be a book 3, but I've just never gone back to it. There just hasn't been a part of me is thinking I really should go finish that trilogy. But that writing, the short stories and the 2 books, I'm so incredibly proud of that writing because it's good writing. They're good stories. It's a good drama. It's based in Canada, which my romance isn't. My romance is based in the States. So it just feels like a very personal collection of books. However, it just doesn't sell. Although it's been my writing has been professionally reviewed, not my romance, my non-romance, and like proper real reviewers love it and say stuff like, why is this book not a bestseller? Like, why has nobody heard of this woman? Why is she not? And I felt sort of discouraged by that because I thought, well, why? I mean, I put my heart and soul into these books and nothing came of it. And then what? I write a romance in 2 weeks and this is where the money's coming from. So
it's crazy.
I kind of, the way I've come to terms with all of that, because you could say, well, if I'm not going to do my real writing, then I don't want it. I think that's just cutting off your nose to spite your face. I think the answer is to do the surprise thing very well. And I do make a point of writing romance very well. It's really important to me that my stories make sense, that my characters have proper development, that when you have a series of 8 books or 5 books, a couple of mine are 5, a couple of mine are 8, the one I'm working on now will be 10, that there is actually a thread through the entire series that builds and builds and builds and builds. So you can consider each book a standalone, of course, for that particular couple's love story. But there is something going on around that story, or they're in a situation that came from the previous 3 books that's being advanced over the next 5. So
I love that.
I take my romance seriously in terms of the writing and the plot and the characters and the subjects. I write contemporary romance. So I write about cancer, losing medical insurance where you're bankrupt because something happens and you have to come up with the money quickly. I write about abuse. I write about alcoholism. A lot of my characters are former soldiers and they're coming back from war zones and they're physically, emotionally, psychologically traumatized, and what they're trying to go into a relationship. How does that look? So it was really important to me that I adjust my self-perception, because there was this sense of, I worked really hard to get a master's degree in international law and business, and I'm writing smut for a living. Like, there's this weird sort of thing that happens in your head. And I thought to myself, don't think about it that way. That's really unfair, because all of my experiences have brought me to this point. There's a reason that I'm disciplined enough to self-publish. There's a reason that I've written 31 books. It's because I'm a hard worker. And there's a reason they sell so well. It's because I'm a good writer. So I shouldn't diminish my accomplishments just because, you write smut and you have a master's degree. Like, what happened? Well, actually, something great happened. Something awesome happened. But yeah, it's one of those things that you can choose how you're going to look at it. And you're quite right. I've chosen to take all of my management, executive experience and put it into this thing that I love and do well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the work ethic, and I understand how budgets work, and I understand about, breaking things into small chunks and time management. And I definitely understand about outsourcing. If it's something I cannot do, I find somebody who does. I have no problem handing parts of my project over to trusted people, because
Yeah.
I'm not an arrogant manager. If I don't know something, I'll say to someone else, send me the invoice, please. You do it. This is beyond me, and I have no problem with that as well. You need a little bit of humility if you're going to be a good manager,
I
I
was going to
think.
say, that's actually a very interesting quality that you're highlighting there, because you are willing to admit, like, I don't do this well, or I don't know how to do
Mm,
this. Let
yeah.
me get the person that can actually do this really well, as opposed to going down a rabbit hole for like Lord knows how long trying to figure something out. I recently
Mm,
had I had a guest recording done, and again, in the off conversations, we were talking through this particular service that we were both in, to help build up like our business. And I said, oh, I spent for the pulling together the How to Podcast Guide, it's a digital course. And I was like, I spent like 4 months learning the system and
wow.
building the system. And the woman I was interviewing, she was like, why did you do that? And I was like, well, I just do it. Like, I've always operated that way. And she was like, why didn't you just ask them if they had somebody that would do it for you? You could have paid them. And I was like, well, I don't know. And then she told me, because there's all these other steps I still have to complete. And she was like, you should just reach out to their customer service, ask them who they have available to help you. She was like, you obviously have to pay for it, but that will free you
Mm,
up. And Marysol, I can't tell you how much time I spend learning stuff myself. There's a large
mhm.
part of me that always wants to have the skill. But now I'm at a
Yeah.
point in like my journey where I'm like, I don't really need to build any more skills here. Like, I don't need to know about web design. Like, I can pass that
Exactly.
along, you know? There's
Exactly.
certain things that I do that I'm like, I don't, and I get people reaching out to me all the time. Like, do you need support for your marketing, or do you need support for like your SEO and all that stuff? And I'm like, no, I know how to do it. Technically I do. I know how to do all of it, but like the time part of it and the actual management part of it, it's, it would be much better for me to outsource that. So I want to recognize you for that, because I think that's also something that a lot of women, myself obviously included, have issues with, is like raising your hand and saying, I don't necessarily know how to do this. Like, let me see if I can get someone else to help support it. So I think that's wonderful that you do that.
Oh, thank you. It is actually something that, this is why after this is done, you and I are going to talk like outside of the studio. I'm going to teach you how to set up your self-publishing. And if you need help, I want you to ask me
Oh
because I
gosh,
am
I'm
happy to
excited.
help you. I'm happy to help you. And if you want someone to help you with your book or do some proofreading for free, please ask me. I'm happy to help you. Because I feel like as women, especially women with our background, where our parents separated or divorced young, and there is still this sense in us of, I cannot be helpless, I cannot be vulnerable, I cannot be seen as struggling. There's always this sense in us that we have to be on top of our game, because if we're not, holy crap, what might happen to us? And there's a lot of
Yeah.
fear. A lot of this is motivated by fear of being helpless, I suppose is the word. And so that's why I admire people who will go down the rabbit hole and learn a lot. And I did all that on the job, though. All the skills I'm using now, between the writing and the editing and the cover design and the visuals and all of that, I learned that on somebody else's dime. I was being paid
Mm-hmm.
to learn those skills. If I had to learn them now, things like social media, I don't know, I don't care, I'm not interested. But my son is very good. And he's at school right now. He's at college here in England for film and photography. So I'm like, in thy house, I've got a kid
Yeah.
who understands TikTok, who understands Instagram, is being taught how to create visuals and knows what to do. And he can do little movies and stuff for me. So I said, sweetie, I will
Yeah.
pay you. Consider this kind of your skill building, right? Learning on the job. And so I've literally just thrown it at my 18-year-old son. I've said, it's yours.
I love that.
The football is yours. My ex-husband designed a lot of my covers for me. I've redone them all, but I knew his skill set. He designed my original website. I've had it redesigned since, but I knew his skill set. So I really believe in, I'm the writer and I need to focus on the writing. And I can do certain parts of it, and I'm happy to do certain parts of it, but there are other parts of it I just feel like will take away from the writing, not add, or I'll feel more burned out. And that's not good for my creativity. So I totally understand where you're coming from about you want the skills, you want to have that control. I understand that as well. But at some point we have to sort of open our hands and say, Jesus, take the wheel, let somebody else do this. So yeah, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with knowing stuff. There is if it's taking away from what we really want to be doing.
Right. Exactly. And that's actually the like, I feel like I'm at that precipice right now personally with like the podcast, and then like the offshoot, like me having this like inspiration to want to write again. Because for the podcast, like I talked about it on like one of the summer series episodes. And I was explaining, I'm like, it's actually quite a bit of work because there's the recording calls there's the intro calls, all the guests have a touch point with me. Then there's the recordings themselves. And then I edit all the recordings. I put the promotional packages together for the marketing of the actual episode itself. I pull all the copy together, like and so for each individual episode, there's probably about 3 hours of work behind every single episode. And my goal for August, and it's August 31st, so I haven't actually reached my goal, but this weekend, we don't have any guests. I'm like, I'm going to hit it hard this weekend. My goal before September started was to get all of the fall series edited and up and running and scheduled, because I wanted to take the fall to be able to focus in on other projects and like not have to every week be like figuring stuff out. So right now I'm like, I have everyone done for September and October. So I just have about 6 episodes or 7 episodes left for the fall series, like to get them up and running. And that's where my head is going, is like, wow, there is a lot of behind the scenes work that I do because I do everything myself. I could probably start, repurposing some of the budget that I use for other things to focus in on, like, maybe I hire someone to help me out. So that way, the winter or spring series that gets recorded and released, like perhaps I'm not going to be the editor for those, like that's where I'm going with this now. I'm like, I do all the things right now. I don't necessarily need to anymore. I already know how to do it.
Well, what you do is you find, like, my kid is 18. He'll be 18 in October, and he's at college for exactly this kind of thing. So what you do is you find a young person who's eager, and they're on a different wavelength than we are because they're learning this stuff in the moment, right? And they're just looking for a chance to have an experience. So just find a young person who's creative and interested, and just throw some money at them. And you're the first thing they can put on their CV in terms of any kind of creative work. And you're going to be helping a young person get into that, take that first step. So, and it takes a little bit off you as well, which is always great, because even if you don't put it towards your work, you have a family, so you can always put it back into them somewhere. Like we can always, if we had an extra 2 hours a day, I'm sure we could find something to do with it. All of us.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Something that my cousin and I joke about quite a bit is we can't remember what we did before we had all of this, like before we got married, before we had kids, like before we were, she's a professor now. Like we're like, our schedules are always like wild. And we always joke around. We're like, what did we do when we were like single and young? Like, what did I do with my time?
Where did our time go? Yeah.
I'm like, this is wild. I love, by the way, that I want to mention this too. I really love that you are involving your son in your work and what you're doing, and giving, and it is kind of giving him a leg up because it's giving him this experience of like, you can do this, and it's giving him confidence. My kids, my kids are very impressed with the podcast. They don't really, I don't think they really know what it is exactly, but because they're so young, the twins are 7 and my son is 8. But they get like, they're very, they're proud of the fact that mommy has this thing. And it's funny because like occasionally in the car, like if I want to spot check an episode or two, like I do this occasionally where I'll like go into my own podcast and I'll play and kind of just scroll through the episodes. And whenever I do that and they hear my voice coming out of the car, they're always like, Mommy, that's you? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, that's the podcast. Yeah. And then I show them like, you know, because I've been interviewing so many authors, like I've been buying everyone's books because I'm like, I can't help it with the books. Like I buy everyone's books. I had your website up right after we talked last time. And I was like, what should I get from here? I'm like, this is like, and so I'll show them. And I had like a young woman who's also going to be in the fall series, 19 years old, self-published a book on women and the women's movement and where we started and how far we've gotten. And she was so passionate about this topic that she, 19 years old, published a book. And amazing. I showed it to my daughters, and I was like, do you want to hear about this author? And I told them, I was like, she's only 19 years old. She's just going into college. She's a freshman in college. She just started her freshman year. And I was showing it to my girls and I was like, this is a big deal. Like, this is something you can do. And so like, I can see their little wheels like spinning and they're like, oh, there's other avenues. Because when I was growing up, it was, you have to go to college. So you have to go to university and you have to get a good job. And that's it. That's your path. And then for me, I was told, well, if you're going to get married and have kids, like you're not going to be able to have a career. And I was like, oh, you know, I have these like two different things. And so I don't want that to be that for them because, you know, myself and both my brothers, that was the pressure. You have to go to college. My older brother, not a college person. He was not the sit down and book guy. Like that's not, he's hands-on. That's always how he's been. But because of that pressure, he went to college and he got a master's, but he's not using any of it because it just wasn't like his thing. He just kind of plowed through it because that's what he was supposed to do, but he's not doing anything with it now. And it's just, I think it's unfortunate because there's a whole generation of us that were pressed into these 9-to-5 molds. And like for many of us, that wasn't the passion. And that's why I think you see a lot of adults burning out. Like a lot of us are burning out of our careers and kind of spiraling in your mid 40s because you're like, this is not what I wanted to do. Like my life is not what I wanted.
I was going to say that I think that's why when we talk about sort of like my generation and then your generation as well, especially when you see the women, we were sort of encouraged, you know, okay, you can go get a degree, but in the end, the most important one is the Mrs. degree that you're going to have at some point. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's your choice. I have a lot of friends back in Canada who did marry young and did have kids young, but every one of their marriages has ended in the past 10 years or so. And it's almost like they're having this resurgence or something, this rediscovery. And they're suddenly finding all these things that they were passionate about as young women, which they set aside for whatever reason. I set mine aside for my parents, or you set yours aside to get into the job market and take care of yourself. And a lot of them set theirs aside for marrying young and having children. But we kind of all reach our 40s and 50s and we say, listen, I've got maybe another 30, 40 years on this planet. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And we are finding ourselves again. But I think of it more as we're remembering ourselves again. I mean, I've gone straight back to writing full time. And this was after you mentioned an abusive relationship where I lost the writing for sort of 4 years because it was threatening to him that I had any financial independence. So it's really only been over the past year that I've returned to my romance writing. And this book that I published 3 weeks ago, my 31st book, is the first book that I've published since leaving the abusive relationship. So if we want to talk about finding our true passion or our purpose again. It also really depends who you have on your team. If you're with somebody who doesn't support your passion or purpose or is openly threatened by it, like my ex was, then you run the risk of losing it. It is possible that. And my son just said to me yesterday, the day before, something like we were talking about my royalties from my 31st book. And he was saying, I would have given up. I would have given up a long time ago. I said, why? And he said, well, you wrote all these books and you had all this success and you were so independent. And then you met this guy and then you sort of started working for his company, like for free, helping him with his company. And then that took over your life. And if you made like $100 in royalties a month, you were lucky. He said, I would just lose it. I would just lose any motivation. And I said, well, I did for a while. But when I started telling my ex I wanted to get back to writing, oh my God. I mean, that's when it got really bad because he didn't see that in a healthy way. Like the woman that I love wants to return to something that makes her happy. What he saw was this person is going to start doing something beyond my control, and she's going to make money from it that will be going directly to her bank account, which means she'll have independence, which means she's closer to leaving me. Like this is the way that these people think, right? So that was really hard in a way because my son was right. It was really discouraging and depressing to go from where I was, a best-selling romance writer, to basically a ghost, not doing anything for years, to finally leaving my ex. And then a year ago saying to myself, well, I gotta do something. And it was straight back to writing. And publishing that book 3 weeks ago was the best I felt since leaving my ex.
That's so
definitely.
Exciting.
Because it's that feeling of I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the thing I meant to do. And a part of me, I was angry at myself for letting him take it away from me. Like I allowed that to happen. And you can make there are a million ways that it happened, and being afraid of him was the main one. But then you think to yourself, I have to forgive myself for that. I have to forgive myself for the fact that I entered this relationship in good faith. He's abusive. I was protecting myself and my son. I was doing what I had to do to get through the day. And if that meant basically cutting off a part of my body to keep us safe, then that's what I would do. But I've got it back. And I think that's something else that maybe your listeners maybe don't hear enough, which is you can lose something really important to you, something that really brings you alive and is your purpose. And you can reclaim it. It is very possible. It's not easy. I'm not going to deny that it's easy. I'm not going to say it's hard. I'm not going to deny that it's hard. Let me get that correct. But it can be done. I mean, I have done it. And I think this most recent book is the one I'm proudest of because it's the one that I didn't think would ever get written. Ever. I didn't think I'd ever get away from him. I didn't think I'd ever be safe. I didn't think I would ever have the energy to write a whole book again. I didn't think I had it in me to do that kind of creative work and just be vulnerable and out there again and hope that my readers were still around after this long break. And they are, and they were. And it is really possible to lose something that matters to you, even if it is your purpose. But it's also really possible to pick it up again and carry on. So I hope that's something that people talk about more because I don't think it's talked about enough.
I was going to say, I want to like make sure that we're highlighting that there because I think not, and it's not even that it just doesn't get talked about enough. Like, I think people also think that like, well, I'm maxed out. Like I've reached a stopping point. Like I can't do anything about this. This is what it is. Yeah. And that's almost never the case. you know that phrase, like, oh, where there's a will, there's a way. I have to
Yeah.
tell you, like, I mean, while some of us go through things that are difficult, we lose ourselves. Ultimately, it is up to the individual. Like, am I going to let this completely overtake me? Or am I going to try to get through this and be able to come out the other side? I had battled, depression and anxiety when I was in my early 20s pretty intensely. I almost
Mm-hmm.
lost my whole, college career. I almost lost the whole thing. And then I snapped myself out. I snapped myself out of it. And that was me taking care of myself. That was like, I had a trauma response and I was like, I need to get my ass in gear, excuse me. But I was like, I need to stop. And
Yeah.
I was able to come out of that. Then I had all my beautiful children, but for 3 years after my wonderful kids were born, lost my whole self. And all I could do, because it was so intense, because I had my son in 2016, the twins in 2017, I was working full time, and I was in full on anxiety, probably postpartum depression response, where I had to do everything. And so I was only sleeping for 3 years. I only slept for like 2 hours a night. And I kept my blinders on and kept my head down and plowed through all of my career goals and continued to be a mom and continued to be, and I would not accept help from anybody. I'm not promoting that. I think it was a terrible idea, but I did it because I was like, I have to get through this part. And then in 2019, I was able to actually start taking care of myself. I have to say, like, when the United States shut down with COVID, that was almost like, to be honest, in my household, it was like a reprieve, because my husband ended up being home with the kids. The kids were in the house, and it gave me a bit of a moment where I was like, there's not as much happening. I can actually take care of myself a little bit more now. And since then, the progression of me taking care of myself and me starting to recognize, like, what are my needs? As I got closer to 40, I was starting to raise my hand again and say, like, well, what about me? Like, is this really what I want to be doing? Like, this doesn't feel right anymore. I don't think I'm in alignment with this anymore. And that's where I started going down that whole self-discovery path of, like, yes, like, I have my profession here, but I'm missing that creative fulfillment.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like you had a reset during COVID. It was a bit of a reset for you.
Yeah. Oh, and it was like a physical and mental reset, because physically, like, my husband and I went down like a healthier journey. I lost, like, from 2019 to now, I think I've lost about 150 pounds, like, just because of this whole, because of this whole reset that we did. And it's crazy because, like, I was looking at pictures of when my twins were baptized. It was like, I think 2018, right before COVID happened. It was maybe 2018, 2019. And I was looking at pictures yesterday, and I, saw what I looked like pre-health journey and pre-weight loss. And I said to my husband, I was like, oh my God. I'm like, because, every once in a while now, I'm like, I'm on a very healthy, I'm not on a strict diet by any means. I do intermittent fasting, but it's been tremendous. It's had a huge impact on my life. And I said to my husband, I'm like, every time I have these, like, urges, like, like, let me just be regular. I'm not going to watch what I'm doing anymore. And then I see these photos from before, and I'm like, oh no, I've actually come quite far from where I've been. So it's been like the past, I want to say, like, 5 to 6 years have been like a huge journey for me to get to where I'm at. And it's been like one thing on top of and it just kept layering, but it's been a journey. A lot of us get stuck focusing on like someone could say, well, look, Marysol, she's so successful. Like, that just kind of happened. Like, I want to be that successful. It's not like snap your fingers and that happens. Like, you have to actively be involved in the steps and paying attention to the decisions you're making. You have to have that feeling of, like, I'm doing the right thing. Like Marysol said, this is the most right you've ever felt in your life. The 31st book is almost like a rebirth for you because of this break that you took. I mean, really, like, this is like really exciting. I'm so happy that you published this new book, because this is like I'm back. Here I am. Like, I've got it back.
Yeah,
That's
this is my
amazing.
yeah, it's my big announcement. And it's kind of interesting because I haven't been in contact with him for a while, but he sent me an email the week after my book was published. Just just this stupid sort of, oh, hello, Marisol. And I just was like, what are you doing? But this is sort of the behavior of the narcissist, which is
Yep.
that I'm well out of his control now. I've done this thing, and he's going to make sure I know he's watching me do these things. Like, it's such a messed up mind game. But I got the email and I said to my son, oh, yeah, yeah, guess who I heard from? And a part of me was sort of expecting it. I mean, I really hoped I
Hmm.
wouldn't. But this is just, if he had sent me that email a year ago, it would have taken the knees out from under me. I would have been immediately
Hmm.
afraid. I would have been right back there in that whole relationship. But it's been a year and I've worked really hard, and I have taken my writing back. I've taken my power back. I've taken my choices back. I'm a single mother. I'm actually dating a very nice man right now. It's only been a few weeks, but it's a really good relationship. It's healthy. So I just feel like, of course, he's going to pop up now. Now that everything
Of course.
is coming together again.
That's
This
like
this
the
guy is
narcissist MO.
playbook.
Like that's
Oh
like
yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah.
that's
Like, oh,
classic.
remember? Yeah, you think it's going well for you now? Remember me? So I
Hmm.
just sort of thought, well, it's not unexpected. Let's put it that way. So that is an unfortunate sort of part of my life that I know I've really moved on from, because I did get this email from him. Just this, and it went on for like
Um,
82 paragraphs. Like,
paragraphs.
it just
I was gonna say, I'm
just
sure.
just on and on and on and on and on. And I just thought, well, okay, like, carry on. Like, I don't know what to say. And I sort of got the email and I deleted it. And then I promptly blocked him. And so then I thought,
Yep.
well, I'll just get back to what I'm doing, which is writing my 32nd book. So
Oh
I'll
my
get back
God, it's so
to
amazing.
doing what I do. So I get up in the morning and I treat my writing like a job. I shower and I put on lipstick and makeup and high heels, and sit down at my desk and I treat it like a proper office job. And
Yeah.
I
Oh
just,
yeah.
and I love it. I love it. And nobody can take it away from me ever again, because I won't let them. Um, I know what it feels like now to lose something that really matters, and how hard it is, how hard you have to fight and claw to get it back. And now that I've got it, it's mine, and it's mine until I decide it's not mine anymore. In the end, I'll be the one who decides when this
Hmm.
ends, not anybody else. And I think if you can say that about where you are in your life, that I've chosen this and it's mine and I decide, then I think that no matter who you are or what you're doing, if it's being a mother, if it's running a company, if it's being a writer, it doesn't matter if it's being a ballet dancer, if you can say those things, that I think you are just doing so great. I think you're doing so great. And I think anybody who can say that should be really proud of themselves.
I agree. Your journey is so amazing. I greatly appreciate you sharing it with the listeners,
Oh,
because you've given us this example here of somebody who's gone through all these very traumatic events, and while you may have lost your path here and there, you still have come into yourself and into your own. And I think the underlying message here for me is, there's always a hope there. You don't have to
mm,
give up. And if you find somebody that can be supportive of you, that can help boost you along when you need it, somebody who's an accountability partner for you, great. If not, and if you're on that road alone, I mean, I always want this podcast to be a source for people. And I always tell people, you can text me through the podcast. Like, it's very easy to get access to me. You don't have to go it alone. And you're not the
no.
only one out there who's going through it. We're all going through these journeys together.
Well, I think for
Um,
all you can say about social media that's negative, I do think that it has an amazing ability to connect us now. And that's why I'm so fond of these podcasts that I'm doing, because I've never really done podcasts before this book. What I love about the podcasts is you feel like you're sitting down with a friend, having a coffee and having a chat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really good podcasts have that vibe for the listeners as well. And the whole idea that you can get to know someone, even just in an hour podcast. People know,
Yep.
any of your listeners now know so much about me in an hour. So I really feel like what you do with your podcast, I think it is indeed something you're very good at. I think it's definitely part of your calling. So yeah, I think that it's amazing to be able to sit down and just talk to people virtually in separate countries and
Yeah.
time zones, and
Oh, it's
find so
amazing.
much that we have in common and something your listeners can maybe tap into as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just recently did a social post where I said, I'm like, podcast felt like a calling for me, but it's also given me this wonderful opportunity to meet all of you. Like, I would have never met anybody. My world is very small here because I work from home and I don't really ever leave the area because I'm like, I just work from home. Like, I can do everything from my house. And it has opened up so many pathways of like, now I have all these women that I can stay in touch with. And it is amazing. And there is that personal through line. This podcast is always going to be an organic discussion. I like to just put it all out there. I share a lot of myself here, and having guests like you on that also are willing to be so vulnerable here is really what this whole podcast is for. I want women to come to this podcast and hear these stories and say, like, that sounds like me. That sounds like my friend. Sounds like something I'm going through, and to feel comfort, to know like, you're not the only one going through this. There's other people out there too. You're not alone. Marysol, thank you so much for joining me today and doing the recording. I'm like so thrilled to chat with you.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, oh my gosh, of course. I could talk to you for like 6 hours. That's why I'm like, oh no, I have to like, listeners, I'm going to link Marysol's websites, and I'll put all of her information in the description so you can access her. I've looked at the book series. I already had some earmarked. I'm kind of like a book hoarder, and I have about 10 or 15 books sitting on my desk right now. So I'm like, I have my eye on a few. But listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And leave us a review, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been great. It's been a really nice way to spend my Saturday afternoon over here in England. Thank you.
Of course. And listeners, we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.